I grew up in Bonnyrigg in Midlothian in a mining community, obviously just did the legislation just after the miners' strike. At the time of the legislation, I was at school, started secondary school in 1987, and was becoming aware that I liked girls, was becoming aware that I was gay. Didn't have any language for that. My family were quite liberal, were quite political. Section 28 for us was probably just part of the general milieu of things that were happening at the time, of reasons why we hated Thatcher, the miners' strike, apartheid, the impact that it was having in our community. So I was aware of the legislation. I remember the stickers and things, but it still wasn't something that we would ever have talked about. And so it had a huge impact on me into my teens. I would say into my 20s, certainly well into adulthood. There was no visibility at all of lesbians or bisexual women for that matter in my community. There was no representation in the television. There was no representation in books that I had access to. I didn't know any lesbians, and the immediate impact was that you were completely isolated. And at that same time was aware of this massive discourse in the media. Growing up in Bonnyrigg, about 10 miles south of Edinburgh, that time Edinburgh was HIV/AIDS capital of the world. So we were constantly being told on the news. And still started secondary school just as the legislation was coming in, right at the height of that homophobic discourse from politicians, from the media, from every aspect of society. I remember being a little bit older, probably been about 13, and again being on holiday in Windermere, my mum's family are from, and there's a big W.H. Smith's in Windermere, and was looking at magazines and picked up a copy of Gay Times and was browsing through that. Of course, Gay Times in the late 1980s, there's no women in Gay Times, but it was safe to look at it there because I wasn't going to run into anybody that I knew. Certainly couldn't have picked up something like that in the newsagents in Bonnyrigg. And coming out of the shop and just casually, conversationally asking my mum if women could be gay. My mum saying, yes, they can. From the mid-teens, came quite close to coming out, thought about it, was at least reading things in girls' magazines by that stage, and at least some awareness that it was a possibility. But I do remember making a quite conscious decision that I wanted to stay on at school, and that being out and staying on at school were not compatible choices, and didn't come out. Stayed on at school in a working class community where most of my peers left. Lots of girls I'd been friendly with, having babies, heterosexual relationships, quite a traditional community in that sense. Lots of people settling down very young, and it was quite a polar choice between you do that or you go to university. And I went to university and I came out when I was 20, and looking at young people now, I think my experience of school would have been very different had I been able to come out, been able to be myself at school. I went to university in the 90s, Section 28, Section 2A was still in place. Knew that I wanted to teach, but also knew that I wasn't going to set foot again in the secondary school. And so didn't teach. Went travelling, met my ex-partner who was Australian. We travelled. I eventually fell into teaching and further education, but would never have considered school teaching. And I think a lot of us made that choice and went into other professions. I think we've probably lost an entire generation of teachers in Scotland who were LGBT, who thought, actually, that's not for me. I'm not going to be welcome there, either because of their own experiences in secondary school or because of the legislation or because of the discourse. Even once Section 28 and Section 2A were abolished, schools did not overnight become safe places for queer teachers, and taught for 20 years in FE before finally doing a maths degree and switching across into secondary in my 40s. So I think my whole career path would have been quite different had it not been for Section 28 and Section 2A. The queer teachers have always been there. There were queer teachers when I was at school. But what strikes me looking back is that even despite Section 2A, even despite the daily onslaught of homophobia, completely unchallenged, the daily the discourses that surrounded us, those teachers still existed, and we still knew, at least on some level, that they were like us. We knew, we recognised each other, at least on some level, and they were as visible as they could be at that time. I think sometimes it's a question of nobody's ever been out here before, and so people think, oh, this is a big change, and you're like, actually, you've always had gay teachers that just perhaps have told you that they were gay, or that they were lesbian, or they were bi, or that they were trans. We know from the surveys that Stonewall have done that being LGBT+ does impact on your educational experiences. it does impact the decision to stay on at school. And so there's a huge missing gap there in terms of the data. I know that we've had a lot of discussion in Scotland about diversity, about increasing the diversity of the teaching profession. Rightly, a lot of that has focused on ethnicity and increasing the numbers of Black and Asian teachers in schools. But we also need to think about diversity in terms of LGBT plus teachers. And we need to start by at the very least capturing data on how many LGBT plus students we have in universities, how many of them sign up for teacher training programmes, how many of them complete teacher training programmes, how many of them complete probation. Because I think, like BAME teachers, we are losing teachers at all stages. The system is leaking teachers, and that diversity is not there because those teachers don't get to the end of the process. If they get to the end of the process, do we retain them in teaching? I think visibility and inclusive education is absolutely crucial. LGBT people have families, we have children, we have grandchildren that are in the education system, as well as being pupils, as well as being teachers. I think for pupils, that visibility is so important. It was so important to me as a young person. I think Ally is just now more important than ever. We can't leave this just to LGBT teachers. It shouldn't be down just to LGBT teachers to make these issues visible. And I think for young people, seeing teachers who they know are in heterosexual relationships, they talk about their husband or wife or whatever, they're cis-presenting, but they seem to be visible allies. Those are the people that I think where it's incredibly powerful. I think sometimes people are put off because they think, it's got to be something massive. We've got to do a big project on LGBT people, or we've got to somehow fit LGBT people into a lesson on algebra. And that's not the case. I teach maths, and I've seen the impact even when I've made a little case study about buying furniture and discounts, and just put in two women's names. And the class immediately noticed that, and you could see kids noting it. Also, sometimes we say, it doesn't matter because there aren't any LGBT people in that class, so we don't have any queer parents. You don't know that. And you do have LGBT people in your school. And if you don't know that, that might be something about the culture in your school that it's not safe for those people to be out, whether they're young people, whether they're teachers, whether they're parents. They are there, and you need to assume that they're there. And you don't wait until there's an LGBT person in your class struggling to start being inclusive.